So why don't you just go back to the beginning? When did this all start? It was the fall of 2006, and Cars had just been released on DVD. I was 9 when I watched Cars for the first time. And you know, when you're that young, you don't ask yourself a whole lot of questions when you watch movies, right? You just kind of sit back and enjoy the ride, you know? No, it wouldn't be until 5 years later when I was 14 that things would really just kind of start to fall apart. That summer in June of 2011 would be when Cars 2 came out. See, before Cars 2, the internet had the typical memed-on, surface-level cinema sins or nostalgia critic-esque questions, like how boats, planes, and trains worked, or how the cars reproduced. Like, I mean, is it like in Robots? Like, do you just kind of order a kid and call it good? Is that just how it goes? Or is there some sort of method of sexual reproduction? And these are both perfectly valid questions to ask, by the way, if you give the movie longer than 30 seconds of thought. And no, I'm not gonna go to any Rule 34 websites, you filthy, disgusting animals. I'm asking from the perspective of genuine curiosity, not because I'm trying to beat my meat to Cars. Hey, easy, man. I'm sorry, it's just been hard, you know? No, yeah, you can take all the time you need. Anyway, Cars 2 just opened up an entirely new can of worms I wasn't expecting. Okay? How so? Well, like, just as an example, in Cars 2, when the main cast is traveling internationally, they need to go through a security check at the airport, right? Which on the surface seems reasonable until you realize a couple of things. The cars have to remove their tires, which I guess is the human equivalent of having to take your shoes off. And this seems like a small detail until you realize that these are security measures that weren't put in place until after the 2011 terrorist attacks. And this gives us a new unsettling piece of information, that 9/11 did in fact happen in the Cars universe. And it raises further questions like, was it the planes that were radicalized, or were there car-based hijackers? Because while it should be open and shut that the planes themselves were radicalized, the fact that the cars need to go through security checkpoints and not the planes themselves seems to imply that there might be some sort of method to override the plane. Perhaps it's a safety measure where, like, if the plane is tired, it can be taken over by a car pilot. Or I suppose it could also imply that there were just as many post-9/11 bomb scares as there were in the years and months that followed this Cars 9/11. Regardless, however, of the questions this raises, it also gives us another piece of information, and that is that this universe very likely has a timeline that is not that dissimilar to our own. We get more information on this in Disney's Planes, but we'll be discussing that in a moment, because there's still one more incredibly troubling piece of information we're given in Cars 2, and that is the existence of the Catholic Church.
Maida, are these cars considered lemons?
Is the Pope Mobile Catholic?
And not only does the Catholic Church exist in the Cars universe, the Pope himself is an influential figure in their world. This also means that figures associated with all denominations of Christianity must, to some extent, exist in this world as well. And to that I ask, what sort of car is Jesus? And furthermore, how far back does Cars history even go? Because in the first Cars, the oldest resident of Radiator Springs is a Model T named Lizzie. She's a 1923 Model T specifically. So are all cars pre-1923 just Model Ts? It brings to mind the questions of how evolution occurs in the Cars world, and which cars have obtained consciousness and which ones haven't. I mean, there are these little flies that look just like cars, but they seem to just be bugs. And that's so weird, right? Because I mean, flies in our universe aren't just tiny people. I would never kill a fly otherwise. Imagine walking by like a dumpster or something on a hot summer day and there's just tiny little people flying all around, their legs dangling like wasps or something. It'd be fucking terrifying, genuinely. I mean, their entire evolutionary history is a mystery. Why have the tractors not gained sentience but all of the other cars have? Why are they essentially the equivalent of livestock? Why do the cars raise them if they don't need livestock? The Cars, from what I understood, from what I gathered throughout watching all of the Cars movies in anticipation for this project, was that the cars do not need physical sustenance to survive other than fuel. So what are they even using these tractors for? Is there some sort of like metal meat that these cars are eating as some sort of delicacy, gnawing on the twisted and mangled pieces of metal like I used to on the ends of my pencils when I was a kid, chewing them off, just trying to gain a deeper understanding of what was going on in this universe? Was what I did back then just a feeble attempt to understand my own thoughts as I delve deeper into this absurd rabbit hole, as my 7th grade teachers blathered on about useless nonsense like the Pythagorean theorem and the difference between igneous and metamorphic rocks and who signed the Coalition of the Willing. I don't have time to ruminate on such trivialities. I'm trying to unlock the secrets of the Cars universe, you fucking Philistines. So shortly before we cut out last time, you mentioned the Disney film Planes and the additional questions that it brought to the table. Yeah, Planes. Really, it really throws a monkey wrench into things, but it does provide us with more insight as to how closely the timelines of our two worlds match up. How so? I'll get to that, but I'm going to provide a little bit of background, if that's all right. Sure. So, Planes is not a Pixar project, but according to Disney itself, the events within the movie are canon in the Cars universe. A lot of people don't know that, but yeah, Planes is Disney's own 3D animated film. It is not a Pixar film. The same goes for a few other movies in Disney's catalog, like Wreck-It Ralph, Frozen, Tangled, Moana, and a few others. Essentially, a 3D animated film produced by Disney is not always also made by Pixar. Pixar never released a film that wasn't produced by Disney, but even still, it wasn't until 2006 that Disney actually came to own Pixar. So before then, Pixar was technically its own independent animation studio. Sorry, I'm rambling. Let's get back to Planes. So in the film, the main character Dusty is a crop dusting plane who dreams of racing alongside planes that are capable of breaking the sound barrier. Now in the human world, this could be an inspirational story about somebody pushing the boundaries and going beyond what they thought was possible for both themselves and for the people around them. But in the context of this universe, it provides some interesting implications for how their society functions. But I'm getting ahead of myself again because that's going to come up later. Now, in order to train for racing, Dusty visits an old World War II plane named Skipper. And Skipper, in an attempt to convince Dusty how dangerous this sort of high-risk flying can be, tells him a story of a naval battle he was in while fighting in the Pacific Theater in World War II. Now, some of you might not quite understand yet what the implications of this story are, but let me break it down for you, okay? This story implies the following: that World War II happened in the Cars universe, and the existence of the Pacific Theater and America's involvement means that Pearl Harbor also happened in the Cars universe. And if Pearl Harbor happened, that then brings us back to that question we asked about September 11th earlier. Were the kamikaze pilots planes that were serving Japan, or were they cars that were piloting unwilling planes to their death, which were then crashing into sentient boats? Because again, boats are sentient in the Cars universe. This also implies the existence of a car Hitler, to which we then ask ourselves, what sort of car was Hitler? Or Winston Churchill? Or FDR? Personally, my guesses are a black 1930 Mercedes 770, a silver green 1939 Vauxhall, and a 1930 Chevrolet Series AD, respectively. And finally, and most disturbing of all, the existence of a car Hitler in car World War II offers another grim reality, and that is the existence of a car Holocaust, meaning that Judaism is yet another religion that we can add that exists in the Cars universe. And now, as such, we essentially have confirmation that the Judeo-Christian paradigm of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism exist fully intact within the Cars universe. And so with that, we get even more questions, because what sort of car was Abraham, or Jehovah, or Muhammad, or Moses? And did their car designs transcend time, or were all cars just wicked old Model Ts until car Henry Ford started unfolding the ultimate eugenics plan of creating more efficient, higher-end, sentient beings? What about other historical figures? What sort of car was Gandhi, or Rosa Parks, or MLK, or JFK, or Princess Diana? What kind of car is Malala Yousafzai? Was Amelia Earhart a car or a plane? And holy shit, did the car Wright brothers invent an entire race of people? How the fuck did that work? And this, for me, is where the cracks in the Cars universe really begin to just shine through. Jack Saint, a YouTuber I enjoy quite a bit, has a much more thoroughly in-depth video about cars and eugenics implications, and you should watch it. I haven't seen it since it came out during the COVID pandemic, so if I end up accidentally parroting some of his points here, just know that it is subconscious and not intentional, and you should definitely check out his video because he is a better YouTuber than me. Right, so what sort of cracks begin to show for you here? I'm pretty invested in this train of thought now. Oh shit, yeah, we're still doing this format. Well, I mean, it's a sort of hell, isn't it? I mean, even in the final act of Planes, Dusty doesn't win the race by overcoming his own limitations. He enters a jet stream, which is able to slingshot him forward just enough to be able to overcome his competitors and win the race. But isn't that a good message too? overcoming insurmountable physical odds by being clever? I mean, on the face of it, absolutely. But the thing is, Dusty will only be able to do that for so long. Once the other racing planes figure out this trick, they too will ride the jet streams, and Dusty is right back at square one. He essentially is doomed to live his life exactly the way he was designed. And so too, this goes for police cars, fire trucks, passenger planes, cruise ships, you name it. Can a police car who has become disillusioned with his profession decide that he no longer wants to uphold the oppressive laws of society in which he lives, or is he forever bound to the shackles of his grand designer? How is it decided which cars will be born as elite racing machines, showered with fame, wealth, and status, and who will eventually become a mascot to the newest line of Rusty's products? Or rather, would be, if that job wasn't already taken by somebody with wealth and status. Sure, the Cars universe does offer freedom of choice to a large number of vehicles. Most vehicles on the road do not have a dedicated job, after all. But for those who weren't given that choice, is it seen as some kind of honor or punishment, or is it just something that the citizens of this society have come to accept without question? How does one become part of this system? Is every car-based profession a sort of dynasty passed down genetically? Or is the type of car your child is born as simply not a genetic factor and completely random? However, if cars are not produced sexually, and if they are in fact pre-made and shipped or potentially purchased by prospective parents, do parents decide what sort of car their child will be? I would have to assume that if car children are being produced, the parents may have some say in the matter of what sort of car their kid is, but then this gives way to an unsettling vision of elitism, wherein wealthy car families can continue to purchase demonstrably more physically efficient and better performing children than those of the poorer car families. It becomes an actual technological advantage. On its face value, this world might seem pretty simple, but beneath the surface, if you just think about it for even a little bit, it's a twisted society that is producing sentient life and potentially selling it at the whims of the consumer. Which brings me to the final piece of information we can glean from Planes. The very idea that Dusty has this dream of becoming a racer and isn't met with even more overwhelming negativity than he already is met with, and that there are people who truly believe that he can beat the odds, implies to me that just as within our own world, the 1% of the Cars universe have peddled to the masses that upward mobility is always possible. And if you just work hard enough, you too can become a self-made millionaire like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates. I don't really understand. You talk like all those men aren't self-made. Oh, well, because they're not. Elon Musk, for example, came from an already wealthy family, and his father was part owner of 3 emerald mines. Although, in the spirit of full disclosure, according to a Business Insider article by Jyoti Mann and Grace Dean from September of 2023, the family has begun to downplay their role in ownership of the mines, instead stating that rather than outright owning them, they simply receive a portion of the emeralds that come from them. I don't really know how that's better, or how, if you're still receiving the profits that directly come from it, that's not still owning a mine, but whatever, I guess. And sure, Elon Musk has built up several companies with minimal help since the late 90s, but the fact that his family was already wealthy and that he had access to resources that wealth would provide means that he already had a massive leg up on almost anybody else. The same goes for Jeff Bezos during the founding of Amazon. You hear about how he started the company out of his garage and built it into what it is today and think, damn, that's pretty insane. And I'll give it to him, it is absolutely insane. However, you have to consider that Bezos had 20 investors early on, and of those 20 investors, 2 of them were his parent, who invested $300,000 in exchange for a 6% stake in the company. Bezos already clearly had the right resources and had connections with the right people, where he was able to get started and give himself a massive leg up again on any potential competitors. And everybody already knows this one, but Bill Gates, while a brilliant software developer in his own right, would have very likely had a significantly harder time getting Microsoft a contract with IBM if his own mother hadn't been sitting on IBM's board of directors. And I'm not trying to be a total downer here. I'm not saying that upward mobility isn't possible in our society. It does happen all the time. And it also isn't to say that hard work isn't a virtue, because it is. But there's also a bit of nefarious messaging that comes with idealizing the American dream that I think causes some Americans to become blind to their own privilege and to disregard the struggles of those who may not have had the same resources or upbringing as them. Because we're taught from the time that we're very young that anyone can be anything as long as they put their mind to it, as long as they pick themselves up by their bootstraps and get to work, forgetting the fact that that metaphor does not make any sense because picking yourself up by your bootstraps is literally impossible. However, at the very least, in our own world, we aren't yet at the point where the wealthy can create bioengineered children person to be physically faster, stronger, or more intelligent than the average person, which of course would give rise to all sorts of ethical questions and moral dilemmas. Oh, fuck!